St. John Council Finance Committee meeting of November 8th to order. First thing on the agenda is item 2, which is the minutes of October 26th. Councillor Hickey, Councillor Norton. Your worship, we're just about to vote on the minutes. All in favor of the minutes, signify by raising your hand. Contrary minded, carried. Item 3 is an approval of the agenda. We've got the 3 items on the agenda, 6.1, 2, and 3. We have a motion to approve the agenda, your worship. Councillor Hickey, all in favor, signify by raising your hand. Contrary minded, carried. Item number 4 is disclosures of conflict of interest, if there are any. Seeing none, we'll carry on. There's nothing on the consent agenda, which takes us to item 6.1, the draft utility fund operating budget for 2024. And for this, I think we go over to Director Fogan. Director, Commissioner.
It's Commissioner.
I forgot.
No problem.
I forgot what you are now.
Mr. goes. I've been called a lot of things, so that's whatever. It all works.
Mr. Fogan, who's going to deliver the utility operating budget. Thanks. Go ahead.
No problem. I'll share the presentation here. All right, assuming everybody can see that, I'm pleased, thank you, Mr. Chair, but I'm pleased to be here today to present the 2024 Utility Fund operating budget. Just a reminder on the timeline here. Today we're looking at bringing the utility potable budget to Finance Committee with a recommendation for receive and file. On November 22nd, we'll be back with the potable and industrial water budget for Finance Committee with recommendation to approve and submit to Council. On November 27th, then we'll move into the Council stage. We're looking for Council to approve first and second reading of the water bylaw. And on December 11th, the utility budgets to Common Council for the third reading of the bylaw. The 2024 potable utility fund budget, just to give you a little context, there's no increases being sought for 2024, so the rate would stay at $14.28, this being the 6th year straight, which just as a side note, despite 4% inflation this year and 7% last year, and I don't know what the cumulative accumulation of or the accumulated inflation is for the last 6 years, but being able to maintain 6 years straight of the rate is quite an accomplishment for your team here at St. John Water. So there has been an ongoing focus of cost reductions that has led to this rate stabilization and also around debt reduction. And once again, there'll be no new debt proposed for 2024, and there hasn't been any debt incurred since 2017. And the budget does align with the wage escalation policy, despite wage escalation rates set from the growth in the general fund. So as you'll note, with no increases in the rate, revenues would be limited, but our budget does align with the wage escalation policy of the general fund. Just the overall picture here for the utility fund operating budget, and I'll go into details of the revenues and expenditures here in a moment. From a revenue standpoint, you'll see our revenues are projected to increase by $1.6 million over 2023. The biggest driver of that is metered water. This is additional potable water supplied to industrial customers. Other revenue is largely due to interest rates or accrued interest that we have of $437,000. And there's also a transfer from reserves brought forward from 2023 into 2024. As far as expenditures, the expenditures will also go up by the same amount, $1.65 million. The largest driver of that would be increases in capital from operating for wastewater capital projects of $1.1 million. And the balance of that really is being used to offset the inflation pressures that we're seeing. As far as our debt reduction, as I stated before, there's no new debt for 2024, and there continues to be efforts to pay down the debt. The fund from capital from operating budget is now at about $5.5 million, just over $5.5 million. And we are continuing to leverage funding from other levels of government in our capital projects. And as you'll see here, I thank the Finance Department for this information, but it's quite significant that our debt has reduced by almost 42% since 2017 levels. That's over $44 million paid down in 7 years. As far as budget initiatives 2024, we are looking to do a couple of things to improve the utility on a go-forward basis. One is we're looking to add an FTE to help us review and improve our safety program. I think the CAO will likely chime in future budget discussions as well, and initiatives that we are taking a revised or an enhanced, I guess, approach to safety and looking to make sure that we have a safe place to work. We're also undertaking some leak detection on the East Water Distribution System, and there's also our fire hydrant inspection and painting program continues. Also, we'll be completing the dredging of the Lancaster Lagoon, and we will continue to look at trenchless technologies to complete more sanitary pipe repairs through pipe patching, which is a whole lot cheaper than digging them up and replacing them to do these type of trenchless technology repairs. There's also money allotted as well for security system upgrades as well, and trying to align some of our gates and lock technology throughout the city to have one common system, also to improve security at some of our facilities. So I mentioned before that the utility has taken steps in the last 7 years to keep that rate stable, and it will continue to do so. And how we're doing that is we are holding on or lowering of some of our costs through whether it's through staffing reductions or CI projects or some optimization projects, and we'll continue to try to do that. And there are efforts on continuous improvement initiatives ongoing. There's no borrowing for capital work, which helps us keep the rate stable. And we're really focusing on asset replacement as opposed to new assets. As you know, we do have a substantial infrastructure deficit, and the focus is to get that infrastructure deficit down and not spend capital money on new assets. And we are seeking to leverage every dollar we can from other levels of government. We're also tendering projects early in efforts to try to get advantageous pricing. We're also adopting and getting into asset management I guess in a much greater extent than what we previously had done. With the infrastructure deficit of the utility, a lot of the focus is just on replacing what is absolutely broken and no longer functional. But in the coming years, you'll see us move towards more of a proactive asset management work. We're aggressively paying down existing debt. We're focusing on increasing capital from operating budgets as the debt retires, so we're not borrowing for some of those new and replacement assets. And from the utility, really, we're looking for opportunities around infill. Infill really generates new revenue from existing infrastructure. This is how we best leverage the infrastructure we already have, which is quite extensive. We'll continue to look for new revenue opportunities, and in 2024, looking to complete the long-term financial plan for the utility as well. So in conclusion, the utility has continued to be aggressive in cost cutting and finding efficiencies and managing assets over the last 6 years. The cost cutting measures such as staff reductions, efficiency gains, and optimization of operations has allowed for residential and commercial rates to be stable over the last 6 years. But the utility faces risks due to increased costs for goods and services, and continued cost cutting measures without impacting the level of services is going to be trickier as time goes on. We did see on project tendering, the price of the equipment has not returned to pre-pandemic levels, and it stayed rather high. So one of the things we are continuing to do, of course, is looking for revenue growth through infills in order to be able to meet that demand on our revenues and on our capital budget. So the recommendation is contained here in the slide. The Finance Committee receive and file the proposed 2024 Utility Fund potable operating budget. And if you have any questions, we can direct them to staff. And I do have my director, Kendall, here with me as well.
Thanks, Commissioner Fogan. If you can stop sharing your screen. Thank you. Questions from the committee for staff? Your worship, go ahead.
Thank you. Ian, I don't have any question. Well, I do have one question. I'm just curious about the dredging for the Lancaster Lagoon. How often is that done? Just curious.
Let's see if Mr. Mason, if he's online. There he is.
The goal, your worship, is to dredge the lagoon, each of the cells every 10 years.
Oh, so each cell every 10 years?
Yeah,
Okay.
there's 4 cells in the lagoon, and the objective is to dredge them every 10 years.
Okay, sounds good. So that's just on a regular schedule then. What I will say, I love the security upgrade to the water supply. I think that's, that's necessary. The 6-year holding the rate is impressive. I see a lot of our financial policies applied into this, not borrowing any more money and doing what you have to do, et cetera, and keeping up. So I love that too. And the reduction in the deficit is impressive of what it will be. 42, I think it said, % over just 8 years. So that's very impressive. So it's great work, by the team. And I think it's good value for the money for the taxpayer. All good news for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will say I'm glad I inherited this department. I've only been here 10 months, so none of this work has really been me. It's been the team and what's come before me. So I'm quite fortunate to be able to present it.
Thanks for being here tonight with us.
Thanks, Mayor Reardon. Councillor Edwin, you have a question?
Thank you. Yes, Chair, I do. So, Commissioner Fogan, I'm just wondering, you had mentioned that there's some continuous improvement items, and I think for us and for the public, it would be great if you could let us know what you have underway.
Sure. Yeah, there are some that are large and small, and I'm sure Director Mason could probably fill in more than I can. But I know there's some technology implementation as far as instrumentation and our SCADA system and how we're monitoring that. And Kendall, I don't know if you have anything more that comes to mind on CI.
Probably the most important piece is when we're flushing. Our flushing is really efficient. When we're flushing for water quality, we flush the minimum amount. It's based on tank levels and when consumers aren't using the water. So we try to minimize the waste, and that way you're treating less at the treatment plant. So overall, it's with drinking water, it usually becomes wastewater as well. So it's a 2-step savings.
That's great. That sounds very green, like a green initiative at the same time. So that's good news. And I know that we're trying to decrease our debt, and Commissioner Fogan, you and I have had discussions about water meters, and I know that there's kind of like more of a long-term plan, and I certainly don't want to be borrowing to do this anytime soon, but I think that we do need to have a real strategic plan going forward for that, because we're one of the few municipalities without it. So I'd like to see people that are not living a single person in a household having to subsidize for larger households. So yeah, thank you very much.
No, agreed. And you will see it as part of our long-term financial plan. It's being built in there. So,
Councillor Norton, Councillor Hickey, any questions or comments? Nope, all good.
all good.
I don't think we had the motion put on the floor, so
I'll
we've
move
got a
that
recommendation. Councillor Hickey and Mayor Reardon, all in favor signify by raising a hand. Contrary minded? Carried. Thank you. Item 6.2. It's a request to adjust the 2023 Heritage Grant budget. And joining us to introduce it is Jennifer Kirshner, our Community Planning Manager.
Thank you for having me. I'm a fresh face here. I don't normally attend finance meetings, so feels like a very auspicious occasion. I'll keep it brief. We do have a request that was originally prepared by the chair of the Heritage Resources Committee in order to kind of discuss the need for additional funds to help really provide the necessary grants to heritage property owners. This is a long-standing grant program. We did some digging, and the program has been in existence for at least 30 years, providing grant funding to our heritage property owners in order to do a lot of important preservation work on their properties with a focus on some of the more intricate details on the buildings, character-defining elements, things like original windows and doors, and really pieces of those buildings that make them as unique and interesting as they are, and make them something that visitors to the community love to see, as well as residents. Recently, we have seen, as well as many developers in more traditional construction areas, really an increase in the costs of products, as well as the demand for quality and qualified professionals. This is something that we see all the time in heritage, particularly because a lot of the elements needed are often created by more boutique, small-scale firms that typically have incredibly long wait lists in order to get things custom made. So just to provide an example, in order to get a rather standard vinyl window, you're looking at under $500 currently. In order to get an aluminum clad wood window, which would be required as kind of a standard replacement in a heritage building, you're looking at over $10,000 for that same window. So in order to continue to maintain these buildings, the investment the average property owner needs to make is significant in order for the whole community to benefit from really an asset that they're just protecting. We have this year paid out a significant number of applications. I believe the numbers that you see in the report before you have actually increased. We are constantly paying out applications every day as the documentation comes in, and we do have a wait list. Staff believe that approximately $30,000 would cover those initial projects that have been submitted in order to kind of continue to see that benefit come through the work that people do. These individuals who do the work take on those additional challenges, the additional wait lists in order to get materials, and of course the additional costs in order to do so. So we are requesting, the recommendation is that $30,000 be allocated from the unspecified grants budget in order to cover essentially our waitlisted applicants.
Thanks, Ms. Kirchner. Question from Councillor Hickey. Councillor Hickey, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Chair. My question through you to Jennifer. Thanks very much for the presentation. My only question is this demand reflected in the budget request that is represented in Growth and Community Services line item that we'll look at next?
I believe the request is the status quo, but that is something it looks like Mr. Fudge, or I'm guessing Mr. Dobbelstein, would be able to answer.
Yeah, this is to the councillor. This is a reclassification of a budget for 2023. So it's essentially, it's not 2024. It's essentially capacity in the 2023 budget. A request to, and why it's before the Finance Committee is it's a request to adjust the budget, moving from $30,000 from unspecified grants in 2023 over to heritage grants in 2023, with an overall impact for the overall city budget being nil.
Right. No, I recognize that, Kevin. No, I'm just wondering if if that demand that's being shown for heritage grants and that application is reflected in the budget ask moving into 2024.
Okay, I see your question.
Is there an increase?
Mr. Dobbelstein can answer that question for us.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. The budget for heritage grants for 2024 is predicted to be status quo. We've had this happen before, most recently in 2018. So the budget reflects demand, and then every once in a while, we'll monitor if there's a spike. So we don't anticipate this changing the budget next year. This is just a one-time ask. We've done it 4 or 5 years ago, but in prior years, especially during COVID, we had less than the budget. So rather than increase the overall budget envelope, we're not recommending changes. We're just asking for this one-time top-up for a portion of unspecified grants that aren't planning to be used anyway. So this seems to solve 2 problems, which is why we're recommending it.
Thanks. Mayor Reardon, to you.
Thank you. I don't have a question. I just want to make a statement. 1, I want to move the recommendation. And 2, I will say that I've owned my heritage home since 1985. I don't remember that program ever not being there. So it has been there a long time, and it has, I would say, it has been a good program for stewards of the buildings. I don't think we'd have the infrastructure we have without that program, because for every dollar I think that they put in, it generates at least $4 or $5 that the private sector puts in. So it's a good deal. So I just want to move the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved. Do I have a seconder? Thanks, Councillor Norton. And over to you, Councillor Redwin.
Thank you, Chair. No, this is great news for this year. I know there's been a lot of people basically pending approval, so that's great. You know, and I appreciate the detailed letter from Chair Watson from the Heritage Board. However, I do just want to say that first of all, is this the only letter that was received, CFO Fudge? Is this all that you've gotten?
Refer that to Mr. Dovelstein. The letter would have been routed through the growth area.
To you, Mr. Chair, Councillor, this is the letter that was sent to Council, and then Council referred the matter to Growth Committee, and then when staff did an assessment, rather than use one of our reserves, which we did in 2018, we realized we could use operating budget, so Growth Committee referred this to Finance Committee to deliberate. I'm not aware of any other letters that have been officially received at this point, but this is the official letter that was received by Council.
So what I will say is the nature of the conversation that happened at the Heritage Board that I sit on was for this to be a permanent ask. So, you know, I do realize that in the letter it says this year. However, that was not the nature of the request from the board itself. So I just wanted to make committee aware. I mean, this is fine for this right now. The only challenge is there's nothing reflected in the budget because the ask is not actually there. So anyway, so we'll see what we can do, if anything, with that. But this is a conversation that, by the way, had started a big discussion before last budget session at the Heritage Board. And so it was something that the Heritage Board wanted to get on here way before now. So anyway, just wanted to let committee know that.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Councillor Redwin. As I understand it, this opportunity, there was a program that we had talked about last budget cycle that just capacity didn't get to this year, which allowed us to have some money in the unspecified grants budget line in order to accommodate. And as staff said, we'll play it by ear. 1 year doesn't a pattern make, but I would think if it continues to roll this way, that we would certainly have to look at adjusting the budget. We have this one on the floor in front of us. Any other questions, comments? Okay, on the question, all those in favor signify by raising your hand. Contrary minded? Carried. Takes us to item 6.3, the general fund operating budget. CFO Fudge, this one's to you.
All right. Good afternoon, Chairman Sullivan, members of the Finance Committee. I'm very pleased to introduce the first draft of the proposed 2024 general operating budget. Before I start the presentation, I do want to extend my thanks to Mr. Craig Levine, our City Controller of the Finance Department, who does an amazing job putting this budget together every year and is instrumental in putting this presentation together as well, along with my thanks to the senior leadership team who have all provided input at the staff level throughout the process. So here's where we're at in the process right now, and with respect to timeline. This afternoon, we're asking for a receive and file. You heard about the utility operating budget earlier from Commissioner Fogan. Receive and file this afternoon also for the general operating fund, and to take any questions the committee may have. We'll return on November 22nd after receiving your feedback today with a recommendation for the Finance Committee for the 2024 operating budgets, both budgets, on November 22nd. We would then bring the general operating budget to council on November 27th, again as a receive and file as we've had in prior years, as well as the utility operating budget for approval with first and second reading of the bylaw taking place on the 27th. And then the final meeting of council is December 11th. At that meeting, we would ask council to conduct third reading of the water bylaw and then make a recommendation with respect to the 2024 general operating budget. If was necessary and there was further meetings required beyond December 11th to have the budget approved, we can set up special meetings of council to accomplish that. So before you on the slide is a budget that balances funding the city's approved strategic plans, master plans, long-term plans, while being at the same time conscientious of the inflationary pressures that are being placed on the taxpayer. The proposed 2024 general operating budget represents $187,750,682 in annual spending in the community on valued service delivery, which is up $10.5 million over the 2023 general operating budget, or 5.9%. With the most recent NBCPI inflation factor for New Brunswick is 4%, so it's hovering around inflation, a little bit higher than inflation in terms of annual spend. Of course, 80% of the budget is funded by the taxpayer in property tax revenue, and we are proposing setting a tax rate for 2024 at $1.58 per $100 of assessed value, and keeping the multiplier also at 1.7. This generates $150.6 million in property tax revenue in 2024, which is up $8.5 million or 5.96% over 2023, driven by an 8.65% increase in the city's tax base, primarily in the residential class. We also recommend continuing advocacy efforts with the provincial government to obtain more flexibility in the multiplier to allow the city to enter into available tax room, and we'll show that tax room later in the presentation. So with the 4-cent tax rate reduction, the city has reduced the municipal tax rate by 20.5 cents or 11.5% over the last 3 years, exceeding the stretch goal targets in the city's long-term financial plan. Another major revenue in the budget is, of course, the core funding equalization grant. We talked at the last meeting how that was being reduced by about $1.5 million or 11.2%. However, we did receive some good news that the regional services grant that offset some of the costs of the regional services is going to be increasing this year, up $463,000 over 2023. So here's a snapshot of the overall budget. We'll touch upon the major variances in expenditures in a few slides for now. I've already referenced the property tax and grant revenues on the previous slide, so just touch upon some of the other revenues. You can see on the slide the surplus from the second previous year of $2.3 million. That's the surplus coming in from 2022 into the 2024 budget. And this is funding the majority of the $3 million reserve for the multiplex project, as provided by council as one of the catalytic projects of council and directed by council through resolution. Also, you'll see a line there called transfer from operating reserves, which is $1.2 million, 1.28. That's made up primarily of transferring in $800,000 available for the community services reserve that wasn't tapped in 2023. So we're making the assumption that will be all tapped into in 2024. That's being drawn in the budget. There's also $250,000 that has been resolved to be drawn from the strategic land reserve to fund the industrial park business startup. That's in that number. And there's also $200,000 being drawn from the growth reserve to fund the North End neighborhood plan. The budget also assumes a net benefit for St. John Energy from the Birchill project of about $1.2 million. This is an estimate at this point. We did connect with St. John Energy just to understand whether this is reasonable. We'll have more, I guess, a better understanding of what this will represent in the coming weeks as we continue to work with St. John Energy and receive quarterly reports on the performance of Birchill. And then finally, the revenue from our own sources, you'll see that's up quite a bit. That's up around $1.25 million, and most of that is to do with short-term interest revenue we're generating off our cash accounts due to rising interest rates. So the slide before you shows the annual operating budget from 2014 to the proposed 2024 budget. With investment being stagnant, you can see from 2014 to 2020, followed by a significant restructure that happened in 2021 that reset the organization. But since 2021, the city has experienced significant tax-based growth, fueled by the market value increase in the residential sector, which has allowed the city to not only restore many services, but make significant reinvestment in city services. With the budget, increasing by $30 million in a 3-year period from 2021 to the proposed budget before you this afternoon at $187.6 million. So the next 3 slides summarize the service level enhancements and initiatives that are expected within the 2024 proposed operating budget. I'll only touch upon the significant ones that have a year-over-year budget implication. So we'll start, we talked about the 4-cent reduction in the property tax rates. Second, we talked about in the previous slide that there's $3 million, again, being put away for the catalytic project, the multiplex. This will bring the capital reserve up to $6 million for this project when you combine what we put away last year in reserve and the planned $3 million reserve this year in 2024. There will be a focus on street cleanliness, including curbside and sightline mowing and street sweeping, with the inclusion of 2 new casual positions and the planned redeployment of 5 locally team positions to the service, with circular materials taking on the responsibility of curbside recycling in 2024. There is a significant increase in taxpayer investment in St. John Transit. So there's approximately a $1 million increase in the budget for St. John Transit subsidy, which represents over 18% increase year over year from 2023. As was the case last year, we expect to draw $200,000 to fund the Northland Neighborhood Plan. I mentioned that in an earlier slide. There's also funding in the budget, currently in the form of an FTE, but certainly looking for feedback from the Finance Committee for increased community coordination support in East St. John, as has been expressed in the council feedback session. So there is an FTE funded in the budget for that. There's also funding for phase 2 of recreation user fee rate review with respect to reviewing the current subsidization levels within the recreation user rates. And although we'll be moving forward many initiatives that are on the slide, I'm only going to focus on 3 that have a direct budget impact. The first would be there's a new position in the budget for a project manager to manage and move forward the backlog of capital projects and maintenance of capital assets that will be instrumental to helping the city work on the business with respect to the development of a much-needed 10-year capital plan. This position will guide the service areas, help them develop the plan, 10-year capital plan that aligns with capital budget. It will also be funded 75% by the general fund and 25% by the utility fund. The budget includes funds to support the startup of the industrial park business. I had mentioned that earlier, based on a soon-to-be recommended governance plan, and that will be funded by drawing from the strategic land reserve $250,000. Also in the budget, we'll be making the industrial parks position, the management position, a dedicated position in the organization. So as you are familiar with, that position is currently being done by Mr. Brian Irving, who's serving 2 hats or wearing 2 hats in the organization. One is a contract manager and one is overseeing industrial parks. So in 2024, we will have a dedicated position for industrial parks and a dedicated position for contract management, again, allowing the city to focus on working on the business. So with respect to industrial parks, that represents an increased spend of about $388,000. Of that $558,000, $388,000 is new over 2023. We've also included $75,000 in additional goods and services to support the new traffic engineer hired in 2023 to move forward with traffic safety enhancement projects for the city. There's funding in the budget. This was added as a late addition. It's not in your kit, but there is funding in the budget. That's $15,000 for a potential council discretionary fund to support small community initiatives in the city, subject to a policy to be created by the city's clerk's office with support from the finance department to be reviewed and approved by common council in the coming months. We're also adding a full-time position and 2 casual positions to support human resources, focus on a 10-year labor relation and workforce strategy, as well as to support the implementation of recommendations that have come out of the city's internal safety audit report. The impact on the budget is approximately $240,000 for this investment. The budget assumes 3 new bylaw enforcement officers to be drawn out of reserve as a pilot. After measuring results of I guess, drawing those funds out of reserves and seeing the results in 2024, we will use that data and that information to make an informed decision as to whether these should be full-time positions considered in future operating budgets of the city. We've also set aside $500,000 into pay-as-you-go to align with the stretch goal that's in the long-term financial plan. This is good news for the city as we will be able to do one of 2 things. One, either make new capital investments, and we'll bring forward those recommendations later in 2024. But for now, we're suggesting leaving it as just general pay-as-you-go to determine whether we need to rely on that money to absorb cost overruns or inflationary pressures in 2024 that may be prevalent in the 2024 capital budget. If we don't need to draw upon this pay-as-you-go fund, then we'll again return to the Finance Committee later in 2024 with recommendation with respect to how we should utilize those funds in the capital budget. In addition to that, there's an additional $500,000 that's being put aside into the capital reserve to fund a future roundabout in St. John in accordance with Move SJ. Finally, it's worth mentioning with the adding of 2 casual positions that I mentioned earlier and the reallocation of 5 FTEs due to circular materials that will also impact improving park services with respect to the maintenance of Rockwood Park, Harbor Passage, Reversing Falls, and other parks. I won't go into detail on this slide. Our acting Commissioner of Growth is present, but before you on this slide are the planned initiatives in 2024 with respect to affordable housing, which include continuing actioning the remaining items uncompleted from 2023, as well as supporting the successful delivery of the Rapid Housing Project to build 39 new affordable units. And the main focus will be on working to achieve success with the $14 million application to the Housing Accelerator Fund, which will fund the initiatives itemized on the slide, projects itemized on the slide. I think we covered this slide and the next slide with my previous comments. I'm going to jump through these 2 slides very quickly. Go to property tax revenue. So we'll start discussing year-over-year variances in the next few slides. So property tax revenue is up about $8.5 million. It's at $8,474,067 year over year, with the residential class paying $8,496,707 in new property tax revenue. So that's 9.91% more in property tax revenue than 2023 in the residential class. The non-residential class is paying $270,186 more than 2023, which is approximately 0.64% more than 2023. And heavy industrial class will be paying $292,826 less in 2024 than in 2023. So you can see the non-residential class and the heavy industrial class pretty much nets out to a reduction in 22,640 property taxes revenue for the year. So what this primarily means is the residential class is funding 100%, actually it's 100.27% of the overall property tax revenue in the 2024 proposed budget. So the 2024 budget is also compliant with the wage escalation policy, and the wage and benefits comprise 52.06% of the overall budget 2024, which is very similar, slightly lower, but very similar to 2023's percentage of budget. The budget increase in wages and benefits was capped, or is capped at 5% for the wage escalation policy, which is calculated as the lesser of the rolling 3-year tax-based growth average and CPI plus 1. That equates to 5%. So the negotiated rates for Local 18 and 486 are embedded in the budget. The recommendation for management group would be an increase for 2024 of 3.5%. And this is the calculation to illustrate compliance with the wage escalation policy. So the 2024 wage and benefit budget has increased $4,611,182 over 2023, which represents a 4.95% increase, which is in compliance with the maximum cap within the wage escalation policy of 5% of CPI plus 1. Let's go through the major year-over-year changes per service area very quickly in the budget so you have an idea of what's in there. If we look at growth and community services budget, it is up $776,000 or 4.18%. Due to wage increases, there's also 3 temporary staff and bylaw enforcement proposed to be funded, the transferring funds from the reserve that I mentioned, as well as the addition of the FTE for Eastside community support. Excuse me. Public Works is up $3.7 million or 8.97% year over year, again due to wage increases. There's also approximately $1 million, $997,000 in street services due to asphalt pricing. It's expected to rise. There's also an increase of $587,000 in that budget for utility cut reinstatements, and the $1 million increase I referenced earlier at St. John Transit's also in Public Works and Transportation Services, as well as the cost of the 2 new casuals to support beautification and parks is in this budget. Public Safety Services is up $2.41 million or 4.04%, which includes inflationary pressures on various expenses as well as increases in cost due to the new records management system for the police. Utilities and infrastructure budget is up $363,000 or 5.18% year over year. Inflation, wage increases, and also this is where the new project manager for capital is allocated. And this is also shared for 75% in the general fund budget. The other 25% would be in the utility budget. Strategic services budget is up $693,000 or 8.75%. $136,000 of this is due to the higher assessment charge from Services New Brunswick. As with the increase in assessment, so does the charge. There's also $90,000 less in recovery from the utility fund due to the cost of service to the utility fund going down, so that recovery is lower in strategic services. The wage increases, general wage increases. We're also increasing cyber reserve self-insurance by $60,000, as well as just general increased costs associated with the insurance program. Other charges are up $1.62 million year over year, mostly from an increase in capital from operating that we went over earlier, in line with the financial plan. As part of the 2024 capital budget, it's funding that capital. And this will allow the city to do more capital, as well as part of the increase in this budget is this is where the special pension payments are made out of, and with increases in the increase in wage and benefit budget, of course, 17% of wages and benefits is special pension payments, so that naturally will increase as wages go up. This slide gives more context on the major budget variances on a line-by-line basis. I've discussed most of it already, so I won't dwell on this slide. And we continue to work the debt management plan, very similar to what Mr. Fogan had, communicated earlier with the utility. By the end of the next year, we expect the general fund debt to be $81 million, approximately. Meaning over the last 10 years, the city has reduced the overall debt balance by almost $38 million in the general fund. And just to give you an idea, if $38 million still existed today, that debt balance was the same today as it was in 2014, we'd be allocating close to $2 million more in interest in our budget to pay for that debt, just for the interest. Let's take a deeper dive into fair taxation before we end the presentation. I mentioned the city has dropped the tax rate by 20.5 cents over the last 3 years, and you can see this is fueled due to the exponential tax base growth in the residential class. And we spoke about this looking back over the last 3 years. The residential assessment base in St. John has increased by almost 33%, 12.7% this year, 12.23% in 2023, and 7.85% in 2022. The non-residential class has increased by 10.48% over the last 3 years, 3.19% this year, 3.46% last year, and 3.82% in 2022. And then finally, heavy industry has increased. That class has increased by 5.98% over the last 3 years, which is represented by 0.44% this year, 2.69% in 2023, and 2.89% in 2022. So, tax burden, just to touch upon tax burden a little bit, even though the city has reduced the tax rate significantly, the residential class will still pay $13.6 million in additional property taxes over the last 2 years, or 16.23% more. So you can see on the slide, the table on the bottom was the change year over year for 2022-2023, so last year's budget. I saw the residential class pay about $5 million more in taxes, or an increase in 6.32% in taxes, even with a 9-cent reduction in the property tax rate. The upper table reflects this year's budget and the proposed reduction in the property tax rate from $1.62 to $1.58, which still results in an increase in property taxes from the residential class of about $8.5 million, or 9.91% more than 2023. So those two percentages combine to be the 16.23% you see on the slide. Excuse me. In contrast, because the tax rate is commingled, because the residential tax rate is commingled with the non-residential and heavy industrial tax rates, there is insufficient flexibility in the multiplier that's capped at 1.7 by legislation to actually enter into tax room. So the non-residential class has paid $571,000 less in property taxes, or 1.58% less when including the provincial tax rate reduction received in 2023, and the benefit from the reduction in the residential rate this year in 2024. So you'll see in the bottom table, the provincial tax rate reduction represents about a $5 million reduction in taxes in 2023. And you'll see at the bottom the incremental, when you're incorporating that, the incremental difference in taxes for the non-residential sector was about $840,000 less in 2023. This year in 2024, rather than paying 3.19% more, which represents the upper table, which would have otherwise been $1.3 million, the taxes paid by the non-residential sector would be $270,000 more. So property tax room, this is why there was room vacated last year. So the municipal tax rate year over year in 2023 went up 18.9 cents because we increased the multiplier from 1.5 to 1.7. But at the same time, the provincial tax rate dropped by 33 cents. So we were not able to enter into about 14.1 cents of tax room in 2023 because of that. And if you look at that 14.1 cent tax room that was vacated that we were not able to enter into because we had a maximum multiplier of 1.7, that represents tax room on that non-residential assessment base in 2023. That represents tax room of about $2.1 million in property tax revenue that the city could not enter into. So when you look at tax room in 2024, this slide shows the result of dropping the tax rate from $1.62 to $1.58. Rather than the non-residential class paying $1.3 million, as I mentioned, or 3.19% more, the class will pay $270,000 more, or 0.64, which means there's tax room left to be entered into of about $1,069,000. So $1,069,867 in tax room in 2024. We would otherwise want to increase the multiplier to ensure that the non-residential class pays 3.19% because we know the assessments being heavily driven by the residential class. So when you combine the tax room for 2023 and 2024 that we're not able to enter into, it represents about $3.2 million in the non-residential class. Let's switch gears to the heavy industrial class. With the provincial tax rate reduction in 2023 and the reduction in the municipal property tax rate in 2023 and 2024, the heavy industrial class will pay $688,000 less over the last 2 years in property taxes, or 5% less over the last 2 years. So this slide's the same format as before. You can see on the bottom part of the table the provincial tax rate reduction. In 2023, the heavy industrial class paid $385,000 less in taxes, or 2.96% less in property taxes. And then 2024, with the drop in the tax rate to $1.58, the class will pay $292,000 less, 2.04% less. The combination of both is the $688,000 that's referenced in that circle on the slide. So, same premise, tax room. We had 14 cents of tax room that we could not enter into in 2023. That 14 cents represents approximately $736,000 in tax room in the heavy industrial class. And when you look at the tax room in 2024, that represents about $356,000 in tax room that we can't enter into. So rather than $63,000 increase in taxes by heavy industry, they're going to pay $292,000 less. That difference is $356,000. So combined with the 2023 tax room, that represents about it's $1,092,839,000. So when you combine the tax room that the city is not able to enter into because of the multiplier for both classes, the non-residential class and the heavy industrial class, for both years, 2023 and 2024, totals $4.3 million of revenue over the last 2 years, which is equivalent to about 4.5 cents on the residential tax rate. We believe more flexibility is merited when looking at the benchmarks across the country on multipliers. One commissioned by the Altus Group in 2021, we've shown this slide to you before, that showed an average multiplier in the commercial to residential ratios across Canada and urban centers is around 2.73. We've also brought forward reports from Harry Kitchen, fair tax expert, who provided information with respect to New Brunswick being below average with respect to flexibility in setting taxes in classes, as well as ratios for New Brunswick when it comes to the ratio of residential to commercial and heavy industrial. So the multipliers across the country generally are higher than they are in New Brunswick through the work that's been done by Mr. Kitchen. And to reemphasize, I won't go over this again, we did this at our last meeting, but to reemphasize, St. John has the lion's share of heavy industry in New Brunswick when it comes to tax base in the province. And recognizing St. John being unique, allowing St. John to retain all the heavy industrial property tax revenue generated in the city would be significant for the city and its ability to deliver services to the community and be immaterial to the overall provincial revenues, which are 12.2 billion in overall revenue for the province in the 2023-2024 main estimates. So in conclusion, we believe the proposed 2024 general operating budget is reflective of the city's approved master plans, continues to demonstrate the City of St. John as a leader in fiscal performance, the reduction in the tax rate of 4 cents, and further reduction in the tax burden, avoiding unnecessary interest charges, and protecting the city from falling back into structural deficits with respect to being compliant in the wage escalation policy. The recommendation this afternoon is to receive and file, and to direct any questions to myself or staff with respect to the proposed budget. Thank you.
Thanks, CFO Fudge. Over to the committee with questions and comments. Mayor Reardon, you're up first.
Thank you, Chair. Kevin, I want to just say thank you to you and your team. You always usually present us with a fantastic budget. I love, there's so much thoughtfulness in this budget. I do have a couple of little quick questions though. Instrat services, the increase of 136,000 was the increased assessment charge. What do we pay in total? Or is that the total amount?
No, that's just the increase. I don't know if Craig's on here, if he has the exact number that's in the budget. If you can pop on, I believe it's around 1.9 million, around that, but not.
Thanks.
Yeah, 1.837 is what's budgeted for 2024.
1.837.
And that's a charge for all municipalities to SMB for the services they provide.
Those services, how did they figure that out? Like, is it
it's a straight rate. It's like, I think it's 16 cents times the assessment base of every city's tax base. So it's a simple little formula.
All right. Okay. When I went through the budget too, there's, we've seen the debt being reduced over time, but there's still, when you look at all those numbers, there's so much debt servicing still there. So that'll be great as we see that decrease over time. And I guess that's one thing we never think about, is that debt servicing and the cost of that. So it's great to have our financial policies in place that also help with all that. So it's been an impressive run with that as well, in this budget as well. So, I just want to move the recommendation to receive it and file it and think about it. But it's an exciting budget. I love there's so many good things in it. So I just want to say thanks to you and your team.
Thanks. Moved by Mayor Reardon, seconded by Councillor Hickey, who is also the next hand in the air. Councillor Hickey.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just a couple questions through you to Commissioner Fudge. Kevin, is the multiplier we're aiming for, is it 273? Is that what we're after in our asks?
Not necessarily. We're just using that as really a benchmark to show that there is additional flexibility in other areas of the province and across Canada. We really would like to have no restrictions and have the ability to set what we want to set. I think that's been the premise of our fair tax report back in 2015 as well. In fact, we'd rather not have the residential rate tied to the other classes. We'd like to have the ability to set as many classes as we want, set the rates the way we want based on what works for the City of St. John. But fairness limits, the way the rates are ratioed in New Brunswick is not uncommon. It's done like that in other areas of the province as well. So really what we're really wanting is more flexibility to allow us to enter the tax room. I think this presentation demonstrated that we're not entering the tax room. And I think the presentation also demonstrated that the burden on the residential class is excessively high because of the restrictions, that we're not able to modify and change tax rates to reflect tax burden and to reflect the actual assessment increases in different classes.
And I would contend it's not excessively high. It's entirely on them, the entire tax burden on them. In fact, heavy industry is getting a break. That's what we're seeing this year. specific to, I appreciate the elaboration on some of the housing efforts specific to our application through the Housing Accelerator Fund. Based on those initiatives, based on that $14 million ask, is there contingencies to those? Should that funding not get approved? Should it not happen? Are there contingencies to those housing files given their importance?
I see Acting Commissioner Poffenroth is on.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to Councillor Hickey. That's a great question. We do have a plan in place, and it's been budgeted for the North End secondary plan. That's been included in the budget. We do have a community services reserve. I think it's $584,000 that we could consider to use for whatever priority items come out if we do not get the half funding. Zoning bylaw amendments, Plan SJ review, still on the work plan regardless if we get the half funding. It would just help do those things a little quicker. So that's where we're at right now. I mean, we hope to hear relatively soon, and then we can come up with our next steps game plan.
Okay.
It's a great question. Thank you.
I appreciate that, because there's a heck of a lot of really important, obviously there's the 8 initiatives that application outlined, and those are incredibly important regardless of that funding. I mean, that not only supports affordable housing, but also just makes, things around e-permitting, bylaw reform, all those just make it easier to develop and invest in this community. I guess to that point, the community services reserve, what's its intention this year? And to that, I know last year we had per door incentives coming out of that and a few others. What's the intention with that again? And will we be renewing that per door incentive around affordable housing that we had initiated?
Perhaps around the incentive funding, I'll call on Director Dobbelstein. Councillor?
Sure, thanks, Commissioner. Through your chair to the councillor. So what you're speaking about, I presume, is the Affordable Housing Grant Fund, which council approved. So we've distributed at least one of those grants to Kaleidoscope Social Impact, as council would know. We're still waiting on those grants. So those grants are they're approved, but they're being held by us. So at this point, we're not suggesting it be topped up. If we get half funding, we can top up further incentives with regards to affordable housing and development. But there wouldn't be anything in the budget specifically unless we wanted to dip into another reserve, like the Community Services Reserve or Growth Reserve, for instance.
And the Community Service Reserve is open-ended enough that should that take place, we could look to it for those per door incentives.
I would say our reserves are open-ended enough that if council wishes to use those reserves for a purpose such as that, you would have the flexibility to do so.
Okay. I think that's all I have for questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Radlin.
Thank you, Chair. So I mean, there's a lot of great things showing up in this budget. It's great. When I looked at the overall presentation, I felt pretty sad to see the brunt end being paid for by the residents again. To think that heavy industry will be paying $688,000 less and residential $13.6 million more. It's mind-boggling to me that we're still talking about this. So obviously we need taxation to be fair. The big thing is when I'm looking at this, there's obviously some detailed budget line items. So I think that obviously we're going to have a little bit more nuanced discussions about it. So I totally appreciate and can do a receive and file on this. In reviewing what the councillors had all kind of had as their asks, there are some things that I think, like Councillor Ogden and Killen, I'm not sure about Councillor Norton when he was talking about recreation. They could all be in here, but some of the things are not so obvious. So that's why, it's one thing that we need to have more discussions. And I need to kind of look over that strat plan again and see like where are we aligning with that. So I haven't been able to do that before this meeting. So I just really want to be able to see what the outcomes are, and I think that that's why we do need that service-based budget, which I know we couldn't do, and that's okay. But it is probably going to cause me to ask more questions than I would need to without that service-based budget. So anyway, I'm happy to support it, and I do want to make mention that Mayor Reardon hadn't gotten to say what her asks were, and I'd love to hear them, if not today, at another time, because we need to be keeping all this in our minds, I think, going forward.
Thanks, Councillor. Perhaps because we've got staff on the line, if we have staff that could talk about those recreation asks. I know that there is information in the kit with regards to, and it's kind of very broad, extra staffing for more maintenance on recreation. Could we have a little elaboration? Was that specifically targeted to some of the quality comments that were made by councillors in their asks? Thank you, Commissioner Hugenholtz. If you could speak to that, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Yes, we did take in the feedback from council a few weeks ago. We did hear many people talk about general maintenance on, everything from medians, our public spaces, the uptown. There was talk about investing more into parks and maintenance of those park facilities, and we do have some modest enhancements built into this particular budget. So these enhancements are certainly in part tied to the resources that are going to be freed up from the Extended Producer Responsibility Program for recycling collection after May 1st. So we are redeploying some of those full-time permanent employees. We are also bolstering with some additional casual resources. So specifically for parks, I guess what that's going to look like is in the summer season, we'll call it. We're going to have about 4 additional people doing parks maintenance. So, back when we made the adjustments to our budget in 2020, the resource levels allocated to, for example, just Rockwood Park and Harbor Passage alone were cut in half. So we have been seeing some of those impacts, and this will allow us to sort of fill some of those gaps, as well as fill in some of the gaps on some of our tourist sites, including Reversing Falls and Fallsview, where essentially there was very limited maintenance, certainly during the pandemic. And then, but as we're seeing demand sort of reestablish there, a lot more visitors coming here via cruise ship and other means, those sites are seeing a lot more attention. We need to pivot our resources to make sure we're able to address that. So that's what's in the budget before you this evening. And that's specific to parks. I will say there's, I guess, a tie-in or connection with median mowing and general cleanliness programs. There as well, we do have some investments here tied in large part again to the reallocation of those resources for recycling collection. But we do anticipate, for example, an enhanced median mowing crew that should be able to deal with some of these areas that don't see mowing, some of those islands and sidewalks throughout the city where you see weeds growing up, several feet high. We're going to be able to address that. We're going to be able to speed up our spring street sweeping program, as well as enhance some of our sweeping programs on bike lanes, for example, through the rest of the season. Look at more attention paid to sightline issues at intersections. So I think many of those investments do speak to some of the concerns that we've heard, both from councillors previously, but also through feedback from our customers as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. And it's an interesting one because it's certainly in our report, but doesn't show up as increased expenses because it is tied to the recycling. So, once that new provincial entity takes over recycling, the city employees that have been doing recycling can be moved over hit these other priorities. So, yeah, thank you, Commissioner Huguenot. It's a good explanation on that. Councillor Norton, we'll go to you first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that the, at least by way of the Fundy Region Solid Waste Commission, the Fundy Service Commission, there's some efforts underway there as it relates to recreation and how they can dovetail or support regional municipalities with some of their initiatives. So not exactly sure how all that plays out, because I think it's still in its infancy, and I think they're still trying to conceptualize exactly how that all looks. But as it relates to some of our recreation endeavors here in the city, just wondering if there's any more insight since Mr. last presented to council, how at that other level of government they're going to be able to support us with some of our initiatives. I guess to help illustrate that, I'm thinking of the next phase of the master plan of Dominion Park, and making sure that there's support there to see that come to fruition. I know it's kind of a big question. I don't know if there's any staff insight into any of that.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, see Michael there. I'll start and then I'll hand it back over to Michael. I know, one of the major things from the Regional Service Commission is looking at the regional arena strategy and looking at funding of looking at what that looks like and reviewing that strategy. That will have a major impact on the findings from that strategy will have an impact on the St. John region. Obviously, outside of recreation, they're involved in looking at a potential investment uptown. Michael, Mr. Hugenholz, you can touch upon any other recreational initiatives that perhaps the RSC is looking at.
Thanks, CFO Fudge. I was actually going to touch on the arena needs assessment as well, which we provided feedback on, and I believe is finalized now and has been or will shortly be presented to the Fundy Region Services Commission. As for the rest of their involvement and how that'll dovetail with our services, certainly on the facility planning and maintenance side of things, it really does remain to be seen. I don't anticipate any major changes throughout 2024. I think it may be a little bit of time before we get some momentum and get things moving in that direction. So that's the arena needs assessment is what I was going to mention. I'm not sure if Acting Commissioner Poffenroth has anything more on the recreation side, but that's my observations on the maintenance side of things.
All right. No, I appreciate that, guys. Sorry.
All right, so Amy, pop in and then pop out and then pop back. Did you have anything to add to that?
I really don't. That's why I popped in and out.
That's great. Just one last quick question, Mr. Chairman, to Acting CAO. Has there been any thought around, this has always kind of been in the back of my mind. I see that there's going to be funding to improve our city's website. Has there been any thought in terms of enhancing our communications department at all? I look at, it was tough times when AIM was going on, and I know there were concerns in terms of communication that went out as it relates to maybe the frequency and the breadth of communication as it related to that, whether it was shelter in place or other things. But I also know that our comms department does heavy lifting with few FTE, and it's been a long time since I've seen any enhancements come in there. I at the risk of comparing apples to oranges, I look at what Moncton has for its communications department in terms of number of people working in the communications department there compared to St. John. I'm just wondering if is there any way that we can better support our community? We know that communication is super important, and I don't know if we can do more with what we currently have.
Yeah, I don't know if Director Casey is on here or not, but I can say that one of the a couple things. First, with the website, we are looking at the website to see whether it still fits our needs in terms of we're looking at other websites across other municipalities. We're reviewing it to see whether it can be better and improved. So I think that's part of the investment we're making in this budget. There's also some additional capacity in communications. If you'll recall, Mr. Dreyer, who used to be in the mayor's office, who has left the city, that position is going to be reporting directly and shared with the mayor's office, but reporting directly to Director Casey, and to leverage that position for enhanced communications. So that's an opportunity that will present itself in 2024.
Okay, that's good. That's it. I think that's a step in the right direction. It's looking for some extra. I'm really just trying to advocate for some extra boots on the ground for that department, and that's certainly good. So thanks for that, and thanks to the mayor's office for sharing that FTE. That's good. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Norton. And I don't know if Chair Hickey wants to jump on this as well, but I know part of your ask with regards to support has to do with communications during emergencies, and I know Chair Hickey's Public Safety Committee is also focusing on that and going to be coming forward with some recommendations. Did you have anything to add to that, Chair?
Nothing significant. Other than we are looking at the recommendation that will be part of the municipal emergency response plan updates. We'll include in it a section around what communications expectations should be and what those should look like moving forward. So really, Chair, would just fall into what the activation of our municipal emergency response plan entails. So I suspect it would fall on existing resourcing, and I don't necessarily think it would require more, but certainly benefits in having added resources specific to what Councillor Norton's referencing.
Yeah, I think just overall as we tighten up a plan for emergencies and have a little more FTE, as the two of you have both alluded to, it's all good and makes us better at doing our job. Mayor Reardon?
Thank you, Chair. I just thought I'd quickly say I was away when the council had the opportunity to go through what they wanted to see. So since Councillor Radwan asked, I thought I might as well say it. So, I mean, it's always difficult to try to figure out where the best way to spend your money is, because there's so many places that you can make an impact and a meaningful impact. But I guess at the end of the day for me, and I did see my money spent in there where I would have recommended it. I thought, what's our number one thing? It's growth. And we know that 80% of our growth will come through immigration. And so I see in here that there's funding to support the delivery of the Succeed and Stay immigration strategy for $149,000. So I thought that was good to have in there. And the other thing that supports immigration and also supports all the residents of St. John is the transit system. And that's going to get an 18.13% lift at $1.02 million. And so that's where I would have put some of my money as well. That's where I think that'll make a huge difference. And I also am thrilled to see us coming down into the 150s. I was hoping for 1.59 for our tax rate. 1.58 is a little extra bonus from my perspective. So I think, I'm very happy with what I'm seeing. It is unfortunate. I mean, that whole, the whole concept of the multiplier, heavy industry, non-residential, we have to work harder on getting that fixed. But, I think as the backbone of the province, especially with heavy industry, we need to be recognized for that. We need to either keep all of that tax that is being collected just from heavy industry at the minimum, or we need to stretch on that multiplier. So I saw what I was or my heart would have been for some of that spend. So really happy. So thanks for asking, Councillor.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'll lend in a few of my comments. Just a couple of the specific recommendations for next year. With regards to the wording just around the support for Eastside community neighborhood support. I would like to see the money stay there. I don't know if necessarily at this point it's a community coordinator. I'm not sure if we know what the community is looking for yet. I'd like to see the money stay there and perhaps with some consultation with the councillors involved, because who knows, it could be a couple of contract positions to help get that up and running or what that looks like. That's all I would say there is maybe it is a coordinator, maybe it's not, but dedicating funding to help some Eastside neighborhood, bring Eastside neighborhood support online, I'm fine with. I really like that we're investing on the business, and there's a few different spots in here where we are adding some FTE for people who I think the long-term capital plan, you know, that we've been talking about and wanting to do for a few years now. And it's a tough thing to do when people have a 40-hour works week worth of work that they have to do, and we're trying to put this long-term plan together as well. I think it will serve us very well. I really appreciate that that's here. And along, you know, FTE in support of the human resource 10-year workforce strategy, labor relations strategy, that all falls into that same bucket of spending some money to work on the business because we're so busy working in the business. You know, certainly mentioned around the horseshoe, but also mentioned in the media and are investing in our industrial parks. It's one of our catalytic projects, and when we look at our increased assessments, I think that's somewhere as well. If we can help that governance to move forward and be ready for some investment, whatever that governance model needs in order to spur on investment in our industrial parks. You know, we get that increased assessment from two places. One is certainly just the reassessment of the properties that we have, but much longer term is new. So I think that is very good investment. I would love to see us continue that and anything we can do to keep that moving forward. So I like that. Gosh, the $1.58, I guess I'm satisfied with. I'm happier with than anything else, and I'm satisfied with it. And thanks to CFO Fudge and the team for providing all the in-depth information. It's an incredibly tight argument that I think might get lost on a few people because of the amount of detail we've thrown out there. You know, this is the Finance Committee. We love seeing the numbers and graphs, but I think after a chart or two, we might lose some of the lay folks out there. But the 2024 incremental property tax revenue bar chart says it all for me. We are in 6% of increased revenue to do a few extra things when inflation's at 4%. So we've got a couple extra percent in revenue to do a lot of extra things that our citizens are asking for, is being entirely financed by the residential property owners in the city of St. John. All those extras. And our tax burden on average is going to go up 9.91%. Last year, we talked about this disparity, and I said that, you know, understandably, it was the first year for the new slider system for the tax classes and municipalities to have some opportunity to have influence on that, but it still needed tweaking. And we recognized that last year, and we made asks about it last year. Well, here we are a year later, and it's worse than it was a year ago. Something has to be done. We can't have the hardworking residents of the city of St. John subsidizing in their property tax a reduction in property tax for heavy industry. That's just wrong. Needs to be fixed. So I will propose, after we deal with the receive and file, I would ask for the committee to consider sending a recommendation to council. And I know last year we wrote a letter to the province, but that we do so again. And I don't think we give them too much detail so that they get glassy-eyed. I think this slide does it, but also to include the two municipal associations that we belong to as well. Because we do need some help. As CFO Fudge has shown us, we're on a bit of an island. Us and Musquash are the majority of the industrial base for the province of New Brunswick. And I appreciate that slide because I knew it was us. I didn't realize how little was everywhere else, and I didn't realize the power to our neighbors down the coast in Musquash. But because it doesn't matter much to other places because they don't have it, I think we need to just do a little bit of explanation and garnering of some support from our partners in the municipal associations as well. And I think that would help us in our discussions with the province. So I'll lay that on separately at the end. And finally, but probably most importantly, to all the work that all of our staff and citizens and councillors have done on our plans, long-term financial plan, strategic plan, Move SJ, Play SJ, we are finally bringing these things together. When I look at processes that some other municipalities are going through, it's like a flashback. When I look at how our things all feed in to this process, I feel like we're the little engine that could. You know, I think I can, and we just keep chugging along and chugging along and chugging along, leads us to a tax rate reduction, enhanced services, focused on strategic initiatives. I think on the whole, what we have in front of us is incredibly smart and planned and strategic and long-term forward-thinking stuff. So with that, I'll stop my rant. Councillor Hickey, your hand went up and then went down. You're good.
I didn't mean to, Chair. But I plugged the fire service review and our 15-year strategic plan too when you mentioned all your plans.
Thank you. Yes, you're right. And more plans that will feed into all these things. So just before I go to CFO Fudge, so what we technically will have before us is just to receive and file here shortly. CFO Fudge, go ahead.
Yes, just to finish off, Chairman, I just wanted to request that any questions over the next couple of weeks, I know you need to take some more time, that's why it's a receive and file this afternoon. Any questions, any requests for more information or more detail that you need to satisfy yourself with the budget, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. And either myself or my staff will ensure you get the information you need to make an informed decision on the 22nd. Thank you.
Thanks. Oh, and which reminds me, I'll take the vote here on this first and then do mine and then get to my last thought. So receive and file, Councillor Radwin, seconded by Councillor Hickey. On the question, all in favor signify by raising your hand. Contrary minded, carried. So my motion that the Finance Committee recommend to Common Council that we send letters to the province and municipal associations with regards to, I'll just say municipal tax reform at this point. I guess I'll make that motion. Okay, thanks. Mayor Reardon, seconded by Councillor Hickey. On the question, Councillor Hickey.
I do just have a quick question, if I can, Chair. I wonder if there'd be reasonable to include on the motion, perhaps and look to other opportunities to better to better offer influence or perspective on this. I wonder if the letter writing campaign sometimes falls on deaf ears, which it seems to have in this case. I don't know if there's more options we could have staff explore or what, but if there were, I think what's clear from these numbers, if there are relationships we can put to the test, now is the time to do it. Because we're leaving where taxpayers are picking up 300 grand worth of taxes that heavy industry isn't paying this year.
And thanks for that, Councillor. I think the change in this and the next step that I had thought of, we certainly have to ask the province. Ultimately, they're the ones that makes the rules, and we have asked before. But I think bringing in our partners at the municipal associations, especially with the new information that we have that we kind of knew intuitively, but thanks to our finance crew for digging it out, on how heavy industry is entirely tilted to this part of the province. Understandably, they may not be knocking on the doors in their own areas with their own MLAs to help out with that, because it doesn't affect other people like it affects us and Musquash. But a little bit of education, which we have all the backup documentation here. I think that's next step. Get our municipality partners. They've got quite a voice, and so we'll empower our ambassadors to bring it forward. Any other questions, comments on that? Okay, on the question, all in favor signify by raising your hand. Contrary minded, carried. Finally, before I ask for the motion to adjourn, certainly thank you to the staff throughout the organization. As we know, the budget process isn't just on the finance team. We have the team throughout the organization supplying information, showing up to budget and finance committee meetings to help just in case we have questions. But certainly to Mr. Levine, Mr. Fudge, and I missed last week, but publicly I also want to thank Director Forgy. She spent a lot of time as the finance ambassador to our negotiations team, and so a lot of extra work being done on top of those 9 to 5 things that we asked them to do. So incredibly proud of our finance team and the work they do on behalf of the citizens of St. John as well. I think we've got a good budget here. I think it's strong. I think it's balanced. I think it looks at a lot of important strategic areas. And I know that our staff and our finance committee also recognize that this isn't our money. We are spending money on behalf of the residents and ratepayers in the city of St. John. And I think the reflection and thought that has gone into the work we have before us today respects that. So thanks very much for all of that. And I'll take a motion to adjourn. Thanks, Your Worship. Thanks, Councillor Radwin. Thanks, Councillor Hickey, and thanks, Councillor Norton. At 5:15.